My name is Silvana, and I married Tom when I was young, full of dreams, with a heart overflowing with hopes that love, once born in the school corridors, would be able to overcome any challenges, that a life filled with this bright feeling would surely turn out happily and cloudlessly, and the future would spread out before us like a silk carpet covered with rose petals. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. We had been in love since high school, our eyes sparkled in the breaks between lessons, our fingers touched when passing notes, and I, naive and enthusiastic, believed that this was enough to build eternity. My father, an influential man who founded and turned the family furniture factory into a thriving business, presented us with something more than just a gift on our wedding day. He handed us the keys to a large house surrounded by greenery and flowers, where every corner seemed to hold the promise of a new life, family warmth, and endless joy. 3 years after the wedding, when our faces were no longer so fresh from youth, but still shone with love, our son Claudio was born, a tiny, loud bundle of happiness who turned our world upside down, filling it with screams, first steps, laughter, and endless sleepless nights, and at that moment I had seemed to have found a new purpose. Over the years, I have fully devoted myself to the role of a wife and mother, trying to be not just good, but perfect, as dictated by tradition and an inner voice that insisted that a real woman makes the house cozy and the family life perfect. I cleaned, polished the floors, hung the curtains like in magazines, cooked delicious dishes, trying recipes from old Italian books, and made sure that Claudio always had everything, the best toys, warmth, and care, and his childhood was filled with confidence that he was loved. Tom's career, unfortunately, did not match his ambitions. Working as a sales manager, he returned home day after day with a tired face, and his eyes increasingly reminded him that the dreams of his youth were fading in office realities. One evening, when I was chopping onions for sauce, he came into the kitchen with a heavy gait, as if he was carrying a stone on his shoulders, and without saying a word, he slammed his briefcase onto the table. "Damn it, Silvana, I can't take this anymore," he blurted out, slamming his fist on the tabletop so that I flinched and the knife slipped from my fingers. "I'm ripping my ass off at this damn job, and for what? For a pittance?" There was not just anger in his voice, but resentment, pain, and frustration that he could no longer keep to himself. "What do you want me to do about it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but my stomach was clenched with tension. His eyes lit up, not with rage, but with hope. "Your father could give me a job at his factory, something normal, in a leadership position. You could talk to him, right?" I hesitated because I knew that my father was a man of principle in business. He always believed that professional qualities were more important than any connections, and was proud that no one from the family enjoyed privileges for nothing. But when I saw Tom sitting with his fists clenched, as if clinging to the last chance, I sighed. "Okay, I'll talk to him tomorrow." The next day, I arrived at the factory and went up to my father's office, whose stern, restrained face still retained that unshakable confidence that I had always admired since childhood. "Dad, I need to ask you something," I began, averting my eyes, because it was unusual for me to ask, especially about this. "It's about Tom. He's unhappy at his job, he's trying, but he's not getting anywhere. I thought maybe you could find a place for him at your place." The father was silent for a long time, then nodded. "Okay, I'll give him a chance. But he will have to prove that he is worthy of this place, just like any other employee." When I told Tom about it, he picked me up in his arms and spun me around the kitchen, laughing, just like in those early years. "You're amazing, Silvana. This will change everything for us." And indeed, everything got better for a while. Money was no longer a problem. We could afford vacations, gifts, and cozy little things, but with one disappearing problem, another grew. Tom's mother, Giovanna, a woman like a storm, began to come more often, as if checking on how we were living, assessing how I was coping. She didn't hide her disapproval. She cast sidelong glances, criticized every little thing, from the arrangement of the furniture to the way I ironed her son's shirts. One day was especially memorable. I was standing in the kitchen, stirring the sauce, when Giovanna, without knocking, opened the door. "Silvana, I need you to take me, right now." I gritted my teeth. "Giovanna, I'm cooking dinner. Can it wait until tomorrow?" Her eyes narrowed. "Are you saying that my needs aren't important after all I've done for this family?" I swallowed the answer, knowing that any remark would cause a scandal. "Sure, just let me finish here." Later, as I drove her to the mall, listening to the stream of complaints about my driving skills, cooking, and everything else about my person, I couldn't help but wonder how I ended up here in this role. I was an intelligent, capable woman with dreams, plans, and ambitions, and now all my energy was being spent on satisfying other people's desires, while my own desires were quietly gathering dust in a corner, forgotten. And on one of those particularly grueling days, when her strength seemed exhausted, Giovanna broke into our house again without even calling. "Silvana." "Stop it," she shouted, her voice piercing my already taut nerves. "I'm hungry, make me something to eat." I restrained myself, put down the laundry, got up and went to the kitchen, where, while cooking, I listened to another stream of criticism. "You poured too much oil again," she muttered, shaking her head. "And chopped the vegetables smaller. Don't you know how to cook properly?" When I put the prepared food in front of her, as a naive person, still harbored a faint hope that Giovanna would eat quickly, without starting the usual quibbles, and leaving behind only an empty plate and maybe a slight trace of perfume in the air. But to my bitter disappointment she did so as I couldn't even expect, coldly and busily collecting all the food from the plate into a plastic container that she always carried with her in her bag, as if she knew in advance how her visit would end. She stood up and, without looking at me, said, "I'll take it with me. I have a bridge club tonight, and it's perfect for a snack." And these words sounded so casual, so ordinary, as if she wasn't depriving my family of dinner, but was just taking her own, as something self-evident. I stared at her in mute amazement, unable to believe her audacity, and only whispered, "But Giovanna." It was our dinner, hoping to awaken at least a shadow of sympathy in her, but she just waved it away, grinning. "Oh, you can always cook more. You don't have anything to do with your time anyway." And with those words, undeterred, she headed for the door, which she then closed with her usual abruptness, leaving behind an echoing silence and a heavy sense of injustice soaked into the walls of the house that once seemed like a fortress to me. I sank into a chair that felt like I was drowning in it, feeling my shoulders slump and my eyes blur, and all I could do at that moment was look at my watch, realizing with growing alarm that I had less than an hour left to cook dinner again before Tom returned home. When he arrived, his footsteps sounded especially loud in the hallway, as if announcing a new scene, and entering the kitchen, he loosened his tie with noticeable fatigue and, looking at the mess, said with a note of irritation in his voice, "What's happening? Why isn't dinner ready?" And at that moment I had to hold back the lump in my throat to keep from crying. I explained how Giovanna came, how she took the food, hoping that he would understand, show at least a little sympathy, but his face darkened like the sky before a thunderstorm. "Mom was here, and you didn't even try to make her feel welcome," he said in an accusing tone that made something snap in me, and added with emphasis, "You know how important family is to me, you should have been more helpful." I, still hoping that he would understand, objected with a note of disbelief in my voice. "Helpful? Tom, she took our dinner. She treats me like a servant in my own house." But he shook his head, clearly annoyed, and without listening, snapped, "You're exaggerating. Mom just wants to feel loved and appreciated. Is that asking too much?" We ate in silence what I had managed to cook hastily, and at those moments I couldn't help but feel how there was a chasm between Tom and me, who had once been close before the merging of souls, now cold, invisible, but absolutely tangible, and at this dinner table he seemed like a stranger to me, as if we were neighbors, pretending to have known each other all their lives. One evening, he came home from work in a particularly foul mood, his face contorted with anger, when he slammed the front door so that the dishes in the kitchen rattled, and shouted, "Silvana, your father is a tyrant. He humiliates people and uses them as pawns in his little game." I froze, stunned, because in my experience, my father was always fair, firm, but not cruel, and certainly not someone who could be called a tyrant. What happened? I asked cautiously, hoping for a reasonable explanation. Tom looked up, his eyes full of rage. I stood up for one employee. The father of your noble family behaved unacceptably with him, humiliated him in front of everyone, and I just couldn't stand by. I said it was wrong. Do you know what your precious daddy did? He fired me. In place. No talking. The world swayed, reality seemed to blur. It wasn't like my father at all. There must be some mistake. Let me talk to him, listen to his side, I offered, hoping to settle everything, but Tom, like a wounded animal, roared, "No. You won't talk to your father. And you won't talk to your mother. As far as we understand, they no longer exist for us. Do you understand?" I trembled as I looked at him, not believing that the very Tom with whom I dreamed of a future was now cutting me off from my family. But I nodded, too shocked and scared to argue, realizing that any word could cause another explosion. In the following weeks, he found a new job, started earning a decent income again, and we even allowed ourselves rare trips to the restaurant. But everything changed, not outwardly, but in the very essence of our relationship, as if something invisible but powerful had grown between us. The warmth, care, and tenderness that used to be in his touch, in his gaze, disappeared, leaving behind a cold indifference and outbursts of anger that he no longer tried to contain. Years have passed. Claudio has grown up. He often asked about his grandparents, and I tried to find neutral answers, holding back tears. But Tom always interrupted the conversation, saying firmly, "You have only one grandmother, my mother. That's all you need to know." When Claudio was preparing to leave for college in another city, I felt a mixture of pride swirling inside me, for how smart, sensitive, kind he had become, and deep sadness, because with his departure from home, I was losing not just my son, but perhaps the only ally I had. I was left in this increasingly cold and alien house. Over the next few years, my life finally merged with the monotonous routine, turning into a series of joyless days, where every morning began with the same sound of the alarm clock, the clink of dishes and Giovanna's footsteps outside the door, and ended with Tom waiting, whose face increasingly bore an expression of dissatisfaction, as if I had already done without saying a word. Something's wrong. I indulged his every whim, whether it was a hot lunch at 6 o'clock sharp or a freshly ironed shirt with a perfectly turned-down collar, and endured constant criticism from Giovanna, whose words stuck into my mind like needles, especially now that Claudio, my only source of light and comfort, had left home and gone to college, leaving an empty the room and the feeling of an irreplaceable emptiness, which made the silence even more ringing. Without his presence, without his look of sympathy, without his smile, which always hid understanding, Tom and Giovanna's attitude towards me became even more difficult, overwhelming, as if with the disappearance of the witness they felt the right to finally dispose of me. One afternoon, when I was on my knees mopping the kitchen floor, trying to remove imaginary stains, the phone rang under the watchful eye of Giovanna, who was sitting at the dining table like a judge on the podium. I reached for the receiver, hoping it might be Claudio, but Giovanna stood up abruptly and snatched it from my hands. "I'll answer," she barked with such authority, as if the phone was part of her property. "You focus on mopping the floor. I can still see the spots." I gritted my teeth and silently returned to my task, but I couldn't help but hear her voice full of venom and cold contempt. "Yes. Is this the residence of Silvana, her father?" "I'm sorry, but Silvana can't talk to you. Please don't call again." I jerked my head up, feeling my blood freeze in my veins, and screamed, "Wait." But she had already hung up the phone and turned to me with a victorious expression. "It was your father," she said coldly. "I told him not to call you anymore. You should thank me for protecting this family from these toxic people." I felt anger boiling in me, as something hot and burning that had been suppressed for too long rose from the depths. "You had no right to do that," I said, and my voice was trembling, but there was steel in it. "This is my father. I should have been allowed to talk to him." Giovanna's eyes narrowed, and there was something venomous in her face. "You're an ungrateful little—" she began, But at that moment Tom came into the kitchen, buttoning his cuff, and immediately noticed the tension in the air. "What's going on here?" "What is it?" he demanded, looking first at me, then at his mother. Giovanna immediately put on a mask of resentment. Her voice became softer, with a hint of suffering. "Oh, Tom, your wife is so disrespectful to me, after all that I have done for this family." Tom turned to me, and I could tell from his face that he believed her. "Is that true, Silvana? Don't you respect my mother?" I opened my mouth to explain, but the words stuck, as they often do when you're betrayed, and I realized with pain that no matter what I said, Tom would only hear his mother, her version, her complaints, because somewhere along the way he stopped being my partner, stopped listening. A year has passed since that fateful phone call from my father, when I still didn't have time to say a word. Life flowed on in its suffocating course. The days merged into a viscous monotony in which there was neither room nor time for dreams, and Tom and Giovanna's control became more and more total, more imperceptibly, but perceptibly penetrated into every cell of my existence. But one cool autumn morning, when the air smelled of wet leaves and the kitchen windows were covered with a thin pattern of frost, everything changed. I was standing at the stove cooking oatmeal, Tom was taking a shower, and to my surprise, Giovanna didn't show up at her usual time, and it was during this rare moment of silence that the phone rang. I clutched the phone, as if afraid that someone would snatch it from me, and said, "Hello," with a sinking voice. The answer was quiet, but unmistakably familiar. "Silvana, is that you? It's your mother. She's very sick. Doctors say she doesn't have much time left. You need her. Both of us." His father's voice was trembling, and there was not only anxiety in it, but also pain and loneliness. I heard the bathroom door open somewhere upstairs. Tom would be coming down any minute. "I'll try, Dad. I promise." "I'll try," I whispered before hurriedly hanging up the phone. When Tom came into the kitchen, drying his hair with a towel, I tried to keep my composure, but my heart was pounding too loudly. "Who was it on the phone?" "What is it?" he asked, and there was already suspicion in his voice. I sighed, trying to keep my voice calm. "It was my father." "My mother, she's very sick." "Tom, she's dying. I need to go to her place." His face froze, then turned as hard as granite. "We've been through this before, Silvana. Your parents don't exist for us anymore." I felt something break inside me, but instead of submitting again, as before, for the first time in many years, I decided to speak out against it. "I'll leave, Tom. With or without your permission. She's my mother. I won't let her die without saying goodbye." Tom's jaw clenched so hard that I could hear his teeth grinding. "Great. Once. That's all you'll get. And then you'll come home. Home, where you belong." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak because there was a lump in my throat. Once was better than nothing. With tears glistening treacherously on my eyelashes, with trembling hands, but with firm determination, I picked up the phone and dialed the number of Claudio, our son, the only one I could trust myself with. When he answered, his voice sounded warm, and I stammered out what had happened. To my surprise and great relief, he immediately offered to come with me. The next morning, Claudio and I set off for my childhood home. The road seemed infinitely long, as if stretched by time and doubts that had accumulated in me over the years, but at the same time it was filled with inner awe, not only fear of meeting, but also anticipation of returning to where once everything was simple. Clear, where the walls held my laughter and the windows held the smell of my mother's pies. When we arrived at a familiar house, the sagging shutters of which were still painted sky blue, as in my childhood, my father was already standing at the door, and I immediately noticed how many years had passed. His back was hunched over, his hair was completely silvered, and his face, previously stern and energetic, now kept a seal. It was as if grief had burned furrows in him, leaving behind deep wrinkles, reminding him of the time we had lost. He didn't say a word, just opened his arms, and when I stepped forward, the years of separation, Reproaches and resentments disappeared in his arms, leaving only silence, warmed by a warmth that made my heart ache. He led us to my mother's room, where silence reigned, interrupted only by the measured hiss of the oxygen machine and the rustle of curtains from the light breeze from the ajar window. Mom was lying in bed, seemingly almost transparent from the disease. Her skin was pale, as if covered with a thin veil, but when she saw me, her eyes flashed with a light that was stronger than time and pain. "Silvana," she whispered, holding out a trembling hand, and in that simple movement there was so much love that all our untold conversations could not contain. "My baby," she added, and I rushed to her, clinging to her palm, which still smelled of lavender, the scent of my childhood. "Mom, I'm here. I'm so sorry. Can you ever forgive me?" I asked, choking with emotion. She smiled and shook her head with difficulty. "There's nothing to forgive, honey. I'm just glad you're here now." We spent the whole day at her bedside, immersing ourselves in memories, recreating pictures from the past, laughing through tears at old stories, talking about things that had never been said, and time seemed to stand still in this room, where Mom, Dad, me and my son were again, for generations, entwined in one last moment. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows on the walls, my mother's breathing became ragged, and she squeezed my hand again, her eyes boring into mine, full of urgency and love. "Silvana," she whispered, and I leaned closer. Promise me that you will live your life. For real. Don't let anyone put your spirit in a cage again." Tears were pouring down my cheeks, and my voice was breaking through the lump in my throat. "I promise, Mom. I promise." She smiled one last time, her lips twitched, and then she closed her eyes, and her hand gradually went limp in mine. "She's gone." I sat next to her, unable to let go of her hand, until suddenly the phone rang. Its crackling sound broke the silence like a scream in a temple. I already knew who Tom was. I went out into the hallway and, picking up the phone, I heard his voice cutting through the line like a knife. "Where the hell are you, Silvana? You should have been back a few hours ago." I pressed the phone to my ear, trying to keep from shaking. "Tom, I can't leave yet. My mother, she just died. I need to stay for the funeral." In response, there was an explosion of rage. "Absolutely not. I told you, once, and that's it. If you don't come back by tomorrow, don't come back at all." His words hung in the air, heavy as a sentence. I felt a pull in my chest, as if something inside wanted to give in, return to the familiar cage. But then I heard my mother's voice again, whispering, "Live your life," and I found the strength to answer calmly, firmly, with unexpected confidence, "Okay, Tom. I'm staying." I ended the call before he could say a word. My heart was pounding in my chest like a hunted animal, but at the same time, for the first time in my life, I felt that I had done something important, not for someone, but for myself. The next few days were spent in a fog of grief, in endless preparations, meetings with relatives, paperwork, choosing clothes, flowers, and music. On the day of the funeral, we were standing around my mother's grave, me, my father, Claudio, and those who still remembered her laughter and kindness, and when the priest began to say a prayer, my phone rang again. Without thinking, I pressed the speakerphone button to turn it off immediately, but before my finger could finish the call, Tom's voice rang out loudly, angrily, to the entire room, "Silvana, this is your last chance. If you don't come home right now, I swear I'll come myself and drag you back. You're ungrateful, after all I've done for you." I quickly disconnected the call, but it was too late. Everyone heard. Those standing nearby exchanged glances. Someone looked away. Claudio's face darkened, compressed into a mask of rage, and my father looked not so much shocked as anxious, as if he had decided on something important. When the service was over, he took me by the elbow and led me aside to a corner where the trees blocked our view. "Silvana," he said softly, and his voice sounded especially tired. "We need to talk. There's something you should know about Tom." Something I should have told you years ago." I looked at him in silence. Everything inside stopped because I felt something was about to happen that would completely change my view of the past. And then he told me, without embellishment, without trying to smooth it out, everything I knew about the day Tom left my father's company was a lie. He didn't leave because he was noble, stood up for a colleague, or became a victim of authoritarian will. No. My father caught him stealing money, direct, cynical, thoughtful, with price manipulation, with forged invoices, with the appropriation of the difference between the real value and the paid customers. I fired him, Silvana, not because he was inconvenient. It was because he was dangerous. I wanted to protect the business, and you. My father explained everything with the directness that was always inherent in him, but which was so lacking in our family in recent years. Looking me straight in the eye and not looking away, he said quietly but firmly, "I didn't tell you then because I thought you loved him, because I hoped that maybe you would find happiness with him, and I didn't want to come between you. I didn't want to destroy what you had chosen. But now that I've heard him talking to you, and seen what your life has become, I can no longer remain silent." These words, simple and heavy, seemed to weigh me down with all their weight, because I suddenly realized how terrible was the price of the lie I so blindly believed in, the lie that allowed Tom to tear me away from my family, instilling in me that they did not care about me, that they were cruel and indifferent, while he and Giovanna, year after year, slowly, methodically destroyed my personality, depriving me of my own voice, the right to an opinion, even the right to compassion. I endured as those who believe that suffering is the price of love endure, who clench their teeth and continue to smile because they are afraid that the alternative is even worse. I allowed myself to be broken, to be cut out of my parents' lives, to isolate myself from the past, just to preserve the illusion of a marriage in which every year there was less heat and more cold. And now that the truth has surfaced, when I realized that it was all based on betrayal, I felt two elements collide in me, despair and liberation. Yes, the world I knew was crumbling, but at the same time, a chance for a new life was rising from its ashes, to become myself again, to return to the woman I was before I was silenced. As if anticipating my thoughts, my father added, "There's something else, Silvana. I recently heard from an old friend that Tom's company is under investigation. It looks like there are serious financial discrepancies. I think he's up to his old tricks again." And those words became the last link in a chain that I didn't want to admit, but which stretched from that distant day of my dismissal to this morning. Everything became clear. Something inside me finally clicked, freed from captivity. The day after the funeral, when the air still smelled of faded flowers and tears, my father, Claudio, and I decided to return to my house. I didn't know what to expect, but it certainly wasn't what I saw. The house I was afraid to return to was filled with the sounds of laughter, the hubbub of voices and the aromas of food. We were right in the middle of a party. Music was coming from the windows, people were crowding in the living room, and Giovanna's friends, dressed in bright, colorful outfits, with glasses in their hands, were discussing something loudly and carefree. I walked in, stunned, not believing my eyes, as if I had entered someone else's life. And then I saw her. Giovanna was standing in the center of the room, holding a glass of red wine in her hand. Her eyes immediately found us among the guests. She narrowed her eyes, curled her lips into a grin, and spoke loudly for everyone to hear. "Well, look who finally deigned to honor us with his presence. You're late, Silvana. My birthday celebration started an hour ago." Her voice was laced with sarcasm and blatant disdain. I stood there, stunned, still shaken by recent events, and in the whirlwind of grief, farewell, and the naked truth, I completely forgot about her birthday. But before I could say anything, she shoved a dirty rag into my hands, as if to a servant. "Don't just stand there," she snapped. "Start cleaning these tables. They won't wipe themselves out." I felt my father tense up next to me. He, who had been silent up to that moment, suddenly took a step forward and, raising his voice, thundered, as in the old days, when he was respected and feared at the factory, "How dare you talk to my daughter like that? She's not a dog to follow your commands. She's a grown woman who deserves respect." There was a deathly silence in the room, even the laughter and conversations of the guests froze, and the glasses froze in the air. Giovanna snorted contemptuously, but there was concern in her eyes. Respect? I'm sorry, she said. She renounced all right to respect when she married my son. Her family? Tom and I know you're nothing to her anymore. I looked at this confrontation with disbelief, watching two people from different worlds arguing about my life. The guests shifted from one foot to the other, not knowing how to behave, but before anyone could leave or interfere, Tom burst into the room, his face contorted with anger. What the hell is going on here? He shouted, his gaze fell on me. Silvana, why don't you serve the guests? And what are they doing here? He pointed sharply at my father and Claudio. And then something inside me snapped. Years of pain, humiliation, and disappointment burst out, and for the first time I didn't hesitate to answer in an even, clear voice. No, Tom. I don't serve anyone, I don't clean, and I'm not silent anymore. The room froze, and even Giovanna seemed speechless. I took a step forward, slowly taking out the documents I had signed the day before from my bag. I know the truth, Tom. I know why you really left my father. And I've had enough. I want a divorce. Tom turned pale, his hands clenched into fists, and for a moment I thought he was going to rush at me, but when he looked around and saw that he was outnumbered, that I was no longer alone, he backed away. Take your divorce, he growled. But don't think you're going to get a dime from me. I couldn't help but laugh, not out of anger, but out of relief. This house is mine, Tom. My father gave it to us as a wedding present. You're the one who has to leave. Tom and Giovanna left soon after, casting venomous glances at us, but I no longer felt fear, only a strange, previously unknown feeling, which, as I later realized, was freedom. When the door closed behind them, and the sounds of their footsteps finally disappeared into the evening air, filled with the remnants of a loud party and understatement, I sank onto the couch, suddenly feeling all the tension of the last hours crash down on my shoulders, making them droop under the weight of realization and exhausted struggle. My body, which had recently been filled with adrenaline, now seemed empty, exhausted, as if I had gone through a storm, leaving behind shattered illusions, but preserving myself. Claudio, who had been standing silently on the sidelines all this time, attentively observing what was happening, finally spoke, and his voice, quiet but filled with reproach, cut through the silence. Mom, why didn't you tell me that everything was so bad? I looked at him. There was sympathy, pain, and slight resentment in his eyes, and the answer came out of me by itself. I'm sorry, Claudio. I thought I was protecting you. I wanted you to grow up in a stable family, to think that everything was fine with you. But now I understand that I was just giving you the wrong lessons about love and respect. I let you see how a woman is silent when she is humiliated, how she sacrifices herself for the sake of a false world. I'm sorry about that. In the following weeks, my life changed radically, as if someone had lifted the veil from my eyes, and I saw the world in new colors, without fear, without pretense, with the feeling that now I was finally living my life. The divorce process began, in which Tom, true to his habit of control, did not give up a single step. He disputed ownership of the house, tried to manipulate our son, sowing doubts in his soul, made unfounded accusations, tried to delay the case, hoping that I would break down. But I was no longer the woman who had been silent in the shadows for years. My father, having kept his promise, supported me in every step, in every difficult decision, in every word I had to utter in court. One afternoon, we were sitting in his office, bathed in soft light, amid the smell of polished countertops and old drawings, discussing immediate plans to expand production, when he suddenly started talking about something I hadn't expected. Silvana, he began. His voice was soft, but there was seriousness in it. I've been thinking for a long time about that. I'm not getting any younger. You can see for yourself how fast the years fly by, and the factory needs new blood. How would you like to come work with me? I froze for a second, stunned, and he continued with a slight smile. I didn't know anything either, but I learned. You're smart, Silvana. You can. You've already proved that you're capable. It's time for you to spread your wings." Thus began a new chapter. Over the next few months, I plunged headlong into the business, delving into the intricacies of management, studying accounting, logistics, production principles, communicating with employees whom I once knew only as people in the background. My father was a patient mentor, did not criticize me if I was wrong, and praised me for the slightest successes. I found a passion for design, for developing new furniture collections, for finding innovative solutions, and every day I felt confidence growing inside me, as the voice that used to whisper that I was just a housewife was disappearing. Meanwhile, the divorce process was coming to an end. The court recognized my rights to the house, and also awarded financial compensation for the years of moral abuse I had to go through. Tom, who was deeply in debt and under investigation for fraud in his own company, lost the opportunity to hold senior positions. As for Giovanna, she disappeared from the horizon as suddenly as she appeared in my life. The last I heard about her, she moved in with some distant relative. Her former social circle turned away from her when the truth about Tom became public. 3 years have passed like one breath, filled with business, changes, new projects, late-night meetings, and self-discovery. And then one Sunday morning, when the house was filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and silence, my father called me into the study. His face was serious as he motioned for me to sit down. "Silvana," he began, and his voice was filled with the emotions he always so carefully concealed. "I'm not well. The doctors, they don't think I have much time left." The world seemed to swing, and everything in the room momentarily ceased to exist. "Dad, no," I whispered, squeezing his hand. He squeezed my fingers gently, and his voice was quiet but calm. "It's okay, honey. I had a good life. And now I can leave knowing that you are strong, that you are free, that everything will be fine with you." I cried, unable to stop, but he continued, "I'm leaving everything to you, Silvana. Business, home, everything. You've proved more than anyone that you can. I know you'll take care of everything." In the following weeks, we spent as much time together as we could, remembering the past, discussing the future, saying goodbye without words, just being around. He left quietly, in his sleep, leaving behind a legacy that has now become my responsibility. The news of his death and that I was his heir quickly spread throughout our small town. I was still getting used to this new role, to the void in my heart that no one else could fill, when one crisp autumn afternoon, filled with the scent of fallen leaves and bitter tea, the doorbell rang at my house. I opened it and froze. Standing in front of me was Tom, the same man I once loved, who had caused me so much pain, now with a bouquet of flowers in his hands and an apologetic expression on his face. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it in years. "Silvana," he said, as if afraid of his own voice. "I'm so sorry about your father. May I come in?" I stepped aside, allowing him to enter, although every movement was filled with inner tension, as if I had let not a person into the house, but a shadow of my past, revived contrary to logic and common sense. We stood in the foyer surrounded by familiar walls, but the space between us was filled with awkwardness, memories that hung in the air like forgotten letters, and a heavy silence that seemed louder than any words. Finally Tom spoke, his voice cautious, almost confessional, as if he knew in advance that this might be his last opportunity. "I've been thinking a lot, Silvana. About us. About who we were, what we had. I know I've made mistakes, terrible mistakes. I failed you, I failed our family. But I've changed. My mother. She died last month. And now that she's gone, nothing stands between us. We could try again. We could be really happy, you and me." I opened my mouth to reply, not knowing yet what words I would find, maybe soft, maybe hard, but definitely honest, when I heard the muffled sound of an approaching car outside, and a few seconds later the front door swung open. A tall, personable man with a confident bearing and a piercingly kind look appeared on the threshold. His voice, filled with warmth and a slight note of haste, echoed through the house. "Silvana, honey, I'm home." And then he froze, noticing the stranger. His eyes slid to Tom, his face tensed, but his tone remained polite. "Who the hell is this?" "What is it?" he asked, stepping forward and extending his hand. "I'm David, Silvana's husband." "And you're Tom, aren't you?" Tom ignored the outstretched hand, his face turned white with anger, and his voice rose to a shout. "Husband? Have you remarried? You betrayed me, Silvana." Anger, frustration, and wounded ego mingled in his gaze, which darted between David and me. David's face turned stony. He took a step forward and, standing between Tom and me, said with cold, quiet confidence, "I advise you to leave. And never speak to my wife like that again." Tom rushed forward, but David was faster, his hand wrapped tightly around Tom's wrist. He gently but persistently led him to the door and, opening it, said sharply, "This is your only warning. Stay away from Silvana calmly. If you ever get close to her or insult her again, you'll regret it." With that, he slammed the door in his face, and only the sound of screeching tires confirmed that Tom had indeed left. David turned to me, his face instantly softened, reflecting his concern. "Are you okay, honey?" "What is it?" he asked, holding out his arms to me. I stepped into his arms, letting myself sink into their warmth, and whispered, "I'm fine. I'm just glad you're home." I looked up, tears were already shining in my eyes, but they were tears of relief, and a smile was playing on my lips. "And I'm so happy that you waited for me, David, after everything that happened." He grinned, kissed me softly on the forehead, and said, "I've loved you since high school, Silvana. I'd wait forever if I had to." We stood there, in each other's arms, surrounded by a home that was now filled with meaning, love, and security, and I marveled at how life closed its circles, how time could bring back what seemed irretrievably lost. David and I had been in love since high school, even before Tom came into my life, and fate, so cruel and unfair at times, still gave us a second chance, which we did not miss. After my divorce, we met again, first by chance, then intentionally, and with every conversation, every gesture, we recalled the pure, sincere love that once warmed us. We got married in a quiet, intimate ceremony just 6 months ago, surrounded only by those closest to us, starting a new chapter in our lives with a sense of peace and harmony that I had missed for many years. Just at that moment, my phone vibrated. I took it out, looked at the screen and smiled, feeling a new, bright warmth spreading in my chest. It was a message from Claudio. "Mom, great news. Jessica is pregnant. You will become a grandmother in the coming months." I read it out loud, and David laughed, hugging me tighter. Life, as if breathing in, found a new rhythm, full of meaning, expectation, and joy. Claudio and his wife Jessica have decided to return to our city, closer to their family, to their roots, and to what is truly important. They wanted to raise their child in an atmosphere of love, support, and strong family ties. When they joined us at the factory, bringing with them the energy of youth, fresh ideas, and a desire to create rather than destroy, I felt that everything finally fell into place. The house was filled with voices, laughter, and the scent of children's expectations, and the walls of the factory came alive again to the sounds of a new age, and in all this I saw a reflection of my own transformation, from a woman who once lived in the shadow of other people's decisions to a woman who built her own destiny. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.